for special meeting. Second.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Public comment? Nope. Okay. All right, each board member, chief?
Yeah, please. So I didn't do a PowerPoint or presentation. We're simply talking about a single item on the agenda, which is about the Brown Act training follow-up that you all asked for at our last meeting. I think we have 3 items here. One is adoption of revisions to agenda policies. One is about policy 1207 about committees, and one is authority related to agendas and committees. So with that, I don't have a lot to say ahead of this other than to open it up for discussions. And I think Chief Ely just asked out 1201 is the 1211. Board meeting agenda is now. We're starting with 1201. No, I got 1211 everywhere. Hold on a second. How did we go out? It should have been 1201. There's too many ones here.
1201 at 1207.
1201, yes. Essentially, I will have, I'll go make a couple copies of these, but this talks about the adoption and amendment of the policies and.
Yeah, 1207.
I will make copies of that.
All he gave us was 1211.
Yeah. Fair failure. My apologies. If you have a copy of 1201.
I do.
Of course, you overachiever. She's even got her fancy shirt on too.
I was getting a bad time for not wearing it last time.
I was the wrong size. I was wearing it till I was the right section.
I attended bar last Saturday at a fundraiser and I wore the shirt. Up at the Blue Goose, and I figured we'd get as much advertising as possible.
Couple packets I have. 3. So, 2 extras there. Yep. And
Five
Janine
City
has one.
softball.
So that one has.
It's a girls softball
I'll give you
league.
one for you. Start driving that discussion. And.
Oh, okay.
There we go. Sorry, one more time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I believe essentially 1201 talks about how policies are adopted. I think they all have 1201 currently. 1201 for Lindsay.
Yeah.
And 1207 will be here.
Anybody else need a 1201? 1201 going on.
Went twice. The gist of 1201 talks about how policies are approved for the second reading. They have to be approved by 2/3, I think, if I remember that correctly. And I know there was some discussion or has been discussion about that. And this was one of the items that was asked to be brought back. So turn it over to you all for discussion. This come up in I believe this came up in the workshop for discussion.
Yeah,
I was not here for
I
that.
think part of it was some that I addressed it, that it seemed weird to me that we always considered every policy twice and it was on the discussion agenda, and I didn't see why we needed to just, to look at them twice. And if we do want to have them come before the board twice, that maybe the first time it's just on as consent, so it's informational. And if somebody has a question or something, they could pull it off of consent. And then the second time it could be for adoption. But usually what I've noticed happening is that when it's on the first time, we discuss it, and if we want any changes, and then when the chief brings it back at the next agenda, we just adopt it summarily because we already discussed it. And when the agenda is in front of us, if we make changes, it doesn't mean that if it's properly noticed that, we're gonna consider a change. It doesn't even have to specify the change, but specify the policy, then, we can change it right there on the fly and adopt it right there and dispense with it. It just seemed like it was taking a lot of time on our agendas.
Well, what I've seen is normally it comes the first time. No real questions, or there's not really any questions you do the first time, usually the second time. It seems like it's when we have
I don't
most
see
of
it that way,
most of the changes. That we would then make a change and then approve it with changes as suggested by the board.
So we're doing it that way anyway,
Yeah.
really.
I don't have an issue with that first one being put on the consent agenda, that basically board's been notified. My only problem with doing it just once and being done with it is board agenda comes out a few days in advance of, if people don't have a chance to read it. It's a way to notify, hey, this is the policy that's coming up next month for approval with the board.
And then we didn't have this in front of us at the workshop, but once I saw it, when it got distributed, under 1201.2, I'm not sure that that's compliant with the Brown Act. I'm going to defer to council, but it says, like, if I wanted a policy change, then I would mark up that policy change and I would send it to the chief and I would send it to all of the board members. And that doesn't seem procedurally.
Do that.
Pardon?
If you send
Can't do that.
you sent to all the board members, isn't that a?
You can't have.
Well, that's what it says here, though. The proposed adopter amendment is initiated by submitting a written draft of the proposed adoption or amendment to each director and the fire chief through the district office and requesting that the item be included for consideration on the agenda.
Yeah, to me, that would be a
So-
definition of.
That's it. So to me,
Yeah,
we need
you'd
to
wanna make
address
some
that as
revisions.
well.
I think you'd probably want to make some revisions to that one. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess there's a couple of different reasons why a policy might come before you for revision. Number one, it could be at the chief's direction because we know a change in the law or something has happened and he brings it forward. The other avenue would be by way of a board member saying, we'd like to amend or update this policy. We would not want to send the revisions out to the entire board
Right.
unless it was going to the public as well. Because really what we want to do is make sure that those suggested revisions are discussed when the public is here, so they can hear what those revisions would be. So that it doesn't just come through and they don't get to or can't, if they want to, take part in that discussion. So for policy revisions, sometimes you'll have a first reading and second reading. And actually the first reading usually would be where the comment and questions come up. The second reading is when those changes or comments are addressed and included in the final document that gets approved. So you are a little flip-flop, but boards can also choose to waive a second reading. Let's just say Chief Dora brings you a policy and it's a change in the law. Do you really need to see it twice if it's consistent with what the law says? Probably not, right? So in that instance, you may choose to approve it at that point in time. If it's by way of a consent agenda, then we probably, because the consent agenda gets adopted all as a whole, you wouldn't be adopting the
Yeah.
policy.
No, it wouldn't be for adoption on the
Yeah.
consent agenda the first time. It would just be for submitted for review or something like that. It wouldn't be an action item for adoption.
You're gonna move. Yeah, you're gonna move and approve. So I think it's just, we can certainly streamline the process for sure. And maybe the change is that we make reference to 2 readings unless waived by the board, which then means you do that at that first meeting. It comes up. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm used to resolutions being adopted on first reading. They're just adopted, and then there's minute orders, and then there's ordinances and ordinances, which I don't think the district ever does.
We don't have, that isn't something.
That's when a first and second reading is required, is on ordinances.
Well, similarly, so for agencies, public agencies that don't adopt ordinances, the way you adopt and you move forward with establishing your rules or what you're going to abide by is by way of your policies. So I would say this is akin to probably what you're used to with an ordinance. It's just that the law doesn't require that we have a first and a second reading, but you can if you want to.
Are we I can't remember whether we've been adopting by resolution or just by motion.
I would imagine you just by motion.
Yeah. That's what I thought.
Yeah, and you don't, it doesn't have to be by resolution. Yeah.
We've never done.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
You
what I
don't, you
thought.
don't have to.
that.
So what would happen is you would have, let's just say 1201, right? It would be attached to the agenda packet. Review and consider adoption of board policy 1201. Now, if the board, there's a lot of feedback, there may be a motion to bring it back for a second meeting with the requested revisions, or you could approve it and be done.
The other thing is, I actually talked to a couple of different chiefs about Lexapol, and they just churn policy. And in my opinion, and it's taking a lot of our time. And there's a part of me that wants to say, you know what, just if it's non-substantive change, technical, like, the name of something changed. We had something like that
Yeah.
recently.
Changing the.
Then just put it on the consent agenda with a cover memo that says, adopt non-substantive, technical change or something.
And that would
like
make complete sense for the consent agenda. I would agree with you.
Yeah, I would agree. If it's, a label or there's a change in a code, so we've updated just the code. But I think anytime you get into where you're updating actual language, then it
Yeah.
needs to come before the board.
Yeah,
I'm fine with doing the single reading of ones that need to be read. And then at that time, if we have discussion and we want to push it to the next meeting for further review, we can do that, or we can adopt it at that point in time. As far as 1201.2, I would say that the biggest thing for that would be could be initiated by any director or by the fire chief. The proposed adoption or amendment is initiated by submitting a written draft of the proposed adoption or amendment to the fire chief
and the chair.
or from the fire chief to director. So the fire chief can put it out to the directors, but the directors can put it to the fire chief, right? So if I have something that I think should be amended, I put it forward to the fire chief. If the fire chief thinks he has something that needs to be amended, it would then go out to the board packet anyway.
Yeah.
For that amendment.
If you wanted to include the board chair, I know the board chair is involved in development of the agenda. I wouldn't
Right.
see any issue with
That's
that
why.
too. Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
you just submit it to the chief and the board chair.
That's fine.
And that's it as
Yeah.
far as what a director does. And
Yeah.
then it's up to the two of you
And
to
it comes out to the
determine
rest
if
of
you're gonna put it on the
Yeah, and
agenda.
it comes out to the rest of the board in the
And-
agenda
yeah,
packet with
exactly.
the public so that we don't have that.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then if it appears on the agenda and you review it and everything looks good, you've had the conversation, you don't have any other feedback, great, you could adopt it. If you don't, if there is enough that you feel like staff needs to go back or we need to make revisions, then it would just come back on the next agenda.
Yeah, and then that way, if you had anything that was coming from a board member, it's only gonna hit one other board member, so you don't.
Right.
Involved in the Brown Act issues there.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
We want to make those changes to 1201.2.
Or,
We're gonna have to change 1201.3 as well to be consistent with what we just described.
Yes.
or it could be submitted as an information item, like at the end of the
Yeah.
agenda.
It could, yeah, no, you absolutely
Information
could.
item. And
If
then
you
that
wanted
way
to
it's
do
not
the
a
first
consent.
presentation as an information item, and then the next time it comes back, you could absolutely do it that way, because the thing with the consent is we do take a motion to approve all of those, and it would make sense to
Yeah.
have it there, but you could do information,
I like to have it.
you certainly could.
I just thought of that and
Yeah.
wanted to offer it. And then when it comes back the second time, that's when it's for discussion and amendment and
Mm-hmm.
any changes to the amendment.
Yeah, that would suffice, because the biggest thing is, like I said, sometimes we get
Just-
big packets. and
Yeah.
You can't get.
Not being
Yeah,
able
no,
to, And those are some of the things that are gonna be in effect for a long time.
I think you're
We
right.
wanna make sure we get through those without,
Okay,
Sure.
well then why don't we can incorporate language that says, let's just say we look at 1201.2 and the proposed adoption goes to the fire chief and board chair, at which point shall be agendized as an information item initially. And then the next paragraph could talk about the actual adoption of the policy as an action item at a subsequent board meeting.
That sounds good to me.
Good.
Good, okay.
So if I understand the workflow, the first version will come in as an informational item. Is there any action direction other than it's in the agenda packet as going? And
No,
then-
I mean, it would be an information item. So to the extent that somebody did have a question or a member of the public wanted to speak on it, they certainly could, but it wouldn't actually be there for the board to approve. It would just be for information. And it may be that there's not much shared at that meeting about it.
Okay. And when we bring it back around, it's approval.
Yep, that is correct.
I'm trying to remember. If a board member asks for an item to be on the agenda, policy or otherwise, is the chair obligated to put it on the agenda? There's a rule about that and I don't remember which one that is.
Future agenda items.
I think it's up to the chair.
Well, the way so that's actually 12, that's part of what's in 1211 policy, and that's establishing your
will,
agenda for the
yeah.
meeting. And it says that it will be agendized, if I remember correctly. I looked at this before I came over to make sure.
1211 is the other arm of the adoption of revisions to agenda policies. So it talks about the meeting agenda and the board packets. It's totality.
It says, so public can make requests, and that's left to the fire chief's judgment to determine whether it's directly related to the district business. There's something in here too. Give me 1 moment.
Yes.
And it then 1211.2 says any director may call the fire chief to request any item to be placed on the agenda no later than 5 o'clock, 7 days prior to the meeting. So that language would imply that if the ask is made, the agenda item will be on there.
I'm not comfortable with that.
And you don't have to do it that way.
I thought there was something in law of parliamentary procedure.
It's
So
likely,
this aside,
it's likely to be parliamentary procedure, not in the law. So
Okay.
sometimes you will have, so I'll tell you, some agencies, right, the board chair and the fire chief, right, would sit down, establish the agenda, make some of those determinations. Sometimes if there's a request for a board agenda item that can come at the end of a meeting for agenda item requests, and then the board can decide if they want it on the agenda. That people will in practice might have different ways that they go about doing it. But the way your policy is drafted right now would suggest that if it's asked, it's going to be on there.
yeah, I'll tell you what I don't like about this is that if somebody requests something to be on the agenda, it's for the next agenda, live or die. And there could be factors that person doesn't know about or something that, we really need to wait till the next meeting because something is going on that will affect the decision in that. So I guess what I'm saying is timing could be an issue, and the way that this is written, it doesn't give the chief and the chair any latitude to give deference to timing.
We ever had anything that's forward?
Not my time.
I think the majority of the stuff comes from the previous board meeting when we do our future agenda items that are, but obviously, yeah, this does not say that. This is something
Exactly, it says
different.
something different. So I mean,
That still qualifies for
Yeah.
this, but this extends that period to this.
you could add something under the 1211.2, much like for the 0.3 section about whether it's the board chair's judgment or board chair and fire chief's judgment about the timing of the placement, the item on the agenda, or give them the ability to determine, whether or not it should be placed on the agenda.
So could you basically put at the bottom of this, all requests will be reviewed by the board chair and fire chief on finalizing the agenda for the
Yeah.
subsequent meeting.
You could do that. So for requests coming from the public, it says the fire chief shall be the sole judge of whether the public request is or is not a matter directly related to district business, which means if Dutour says it's not, that item coming from the public doesn't go on your agenda. I'm not sure that that's necessarily what we would say for board requests, but we could do something similar to that. You know, the board chair and fire chief determine it's not appropriate for the agenda, the next agenda. It's up to their sole discretion to make that determination. And then if somebody, a board member did ask and they were unhappy with that next board meeting certainly could be an opportunity for them to say something during board member comments about the request or why they want it on the agenda.
Good with that.
You know, I'm still reading through this. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? I apologize.
Yeah, no, of course. So under 1211.2, and that's the section of this policy that talks about a board of director, a member asking for an item on the agenda, we could add a paragraph just below it that is entitled board chair and fire chief's judgment, and say the fire chief and board chair shall have the authority to determine whether or not that item should be placed on the next board agenda.
Okay.
That'll kind of mirror 1211.
It would be very similar to 1211.3.2. It would.
Yeah, and on that, 0.3.2, it says the fire chief shall be the sole judgment of whether the public request is or is not a matter directly related to district business. But it doesn't go on to say, and shall decide whether it will be put on an agenda.
Fair enough. You could
You
add
know,
that.
I
I
mean,
mean, to clarify, yeah, by implication, that's what it means. But if somebody read this, they may not know.
No, say, no, you have to put it on the
Yeah.
agenda. You can say that once it's on the agenda that you don't think it's the district's business, but
We could add something there, and that just says request is or is not a matter directly related to district business and appropriate as an agenda item or something to that
Yeah.
effect. So then folks know that that determination also then triggers whether or not it will
Yeah.
appear on the agenda.
So, we'll let.
Since I thought this was the one we were looking at today, we do want to update 1211.9. The citation to the Public Records Act is off. They changed the numbering on that a handful of years ago. So I can give you that. I can give you that change.
So we were just doing that, we would have to bring it.
That's correct. The laws are all the same. They just, for whatever reason, changed the
Changed the code.
numbering for it. Yeah.
I would ask the board, 1211.3.4 limitations. Do you want to define a time period for speaking? So that it's not variable?
do we say 3 minutes on our agenda?
We do not.
No.
Did we say it on the agenda?
See, no, it's not. I'm not.
No, it's not on there.
Wouldn't you want to have the versatility to put different time limits on depending on what we're talking about, and who's there and
I think
everything
that's up
else?
to you, but if you were doing that, you may find yourself battling
Yeah.
against.
I think you limit it to 3 minutes. You can always, the board can always
Choose to
choose
extend.
to extend if needed.
It's good to have a blanket rule, because if we have too much flexibility, what happens or could happen is somebody says, well, there were same number of people here at the last meeting and they got 5 minutes, and now this meeting, it must be because I'm speaking and I only got 3 minutes.
Especially the 3 minute one.
Yeah,
3
it's
minutes.
pretty standard.
It is.
And then let's add it to our agenda.
I mean.
You can add it under public comment, yeah.
Yeah, and then let's add it to our agenda where we say public comment,
One other question for you in 1211.4 for testimony, which I'm taking as public comment. Public comment for items not on the agenda. Under the Brown Act, we are not required to take public comment on items not on the agenda. It's only on items on the agenda. You can keep it the way it is, but you don't have to. And why? Because you're giving shorter time frame notice. People know regular meetings, they're set regular meetings. So that's when folks know I can come and make comment on even items that aren't on the agenda. Special meeting like this, what the Brown Act says is they have a right to comment only on items on the
So you're
agenda.
saying delete the special meetings?
Weekly. You don't have to. If you want to keep with your current practice, you certainly can. I just wanted to pinpoint that as an option.
So we're talking about a emergency item. We need to order sand for the imminent flooding and we're trying to get emergency approval, et cetera. And they want to talk about how they have to wait in lines.
Exactly. They were disappointed in how long it took them to get the approval for a burning permit or something like that. For your special meeting, it can be just to what's on the agenda, which gives you the ability to have more succinct special meetings and stick to the specific topic that's on the agenda.
Are we good with that?
Yeah.
We don't want to be consistent.
These people over here are talking way too much.
Yeah.
Oh,
Especially the one in the center. The one in the center is really tough.
You'll just have, I would just have the template for your special and regular meetings and just use a different one. Yeah.
And Gary, the wife's on the end, so she's safe. The one in the center.
Good.
And we know who that is, right?
Yeah.
So we would still have a public. It would just be specific to the agenda.
Items.
We would have to have language that's specific.
This is, how do you reconcile 8.2 and 8.7? You know, I mean, I know what I see.
8.2.
Well, it says that board packets at each regular board meeting shall be in the order similar to the meeting agenda or as directed by the president. There shall be as follows. But then right before that, you have the agenda. Shouldn't they kind of be incorporated?
They could be.
Do we need everything that's in
Yeah.
11.7?
You don't even have, me tell you that, you don't have to have the listed order in the policy if you don't want to. That would give you the flexibility depending upon the meeting to change the order because sometimes there may be a need to wait for closed session until after the meeting
A lot
or
of things we do.
And also, if there isn't, let's just say correspondence review. If there's no correspondence, do we have to list it?
No.
You see what I'm saying? I think we should just list what we have.
So do you want?
In other words, my impression is that this has been interpreted as these are standing items and these will always be on the agenda. And I think they should only be there if there's an item.
Do we need a business order?
you don't.
11.7, or would you just like to rely on something like 8.2 that kind of covers generalities, or do we need either of them?
Yeah, I just saw something else too, the report on closed session. The report on closed session is supposed to happen immediately after closed session.
That's true.
Oh,
It is.
we're at,
So that's number
And that,
4
and that
on
should be
business.
dispensed with, done, and not brought up at the next meeting.
That
It could be, but
the closed session.
it says report on previous
Well,
closed
what,
session.
what that really should mean is the report on the closed session immediately preceding it. I agree with you. It's not the previous meeting's closed session. It's as soon as you come out of closed, you should report out action taken in closed
Yeah.
session.
Right, and then that's it.
Yeah.
And
That's
the closed
correct.
session isn't
So
even
you have to
listed
report
here.
out your action taken prior to following the regular session.
There it is.
You could call the order and then immediately report out because you're gonna wanna make sure folks know that the meeting is back in order, but the key is that you make sure that you very quickly out thereafter report out, but you would open your meeting. You
Yeah,
would.
because normally what we do, it doesn't follow this, but we do call to order of the regular session. We do the flag salute. We dismiss for closed session.
Yes,
Then we come back and we report back from closed session and reopen the regular session.
yeah, which is, you do have to open for close because if there are members of the public here, they do have the right to comment on items on the closed session agenda.
so my question to you all is,
This is the sequence we're using.
it sounds like 11.7 could just, hey, we're gonna have a business order or
Oh, and it just says,
tied in the board packet.
But the report on previous closed session, I would just delete that.
well, I think you can delete all of it. You just need to make sure on your agenda that you have a report of action taken in closed session on your agenda.
It's in
Right
the
after.
minutes.
Yeah.
It will be in the minutes. And then when you come out of closed session, you'll give your report.
Yes, absolutely.
Right then and there, not at the next meeting.
No, yeah,
No,
I don't think-
I think
I
that's what
think
this-
that's what this means. I think it's just confusing. Yeah,
But then number 17 is closed session.
If
If
needed
needed.
at the end of the meeting.
it if you reconvene to close session at the end.
I see.
Yeah, but you do not have to have 1211.7. You could take that. And agenda content gives you the ability to list the items for the board's consideration. And then you could follow the order in which is appropriate for that meeting.
So let's get rid of it.
And then that makes more sense on board packet because those are standing things that get
They are.
reported.
Yeah, and that's fine. Question for you. 1211.8.1. It says that board packets shall be available online at the district's website,
Yes.
Station 17, and delivered 4 days prior to the meeting date. That's more than 72 hours.
That's like 96.
It is 96 hours. So I think you want to reduce that because this would say if you were to post 72 hours, which the law allows you, somebody could say, well, you violated your policy because it actually says we have to do it 4 days.
Duly noted.
So we might want to update that.
Change it to 3.
Three days before. Or?
Yeah, 72 hours,
3
for
days,
3
right?
days.
It doesn't,
Remove the
that's-
days and put 72 hours.
Yeah.
the 72 hours is the minimum.
Mhm.
But it can go out sooner.
It
Yeah,
can,
that's what it
it
says.
can.
Later than.
It can go out sooner, number
I-
one. And
Well,
number two, when it gets distributed to the board, it must be posted to the public at the same
That's correct.
time.
That is correct.
It has to be made available. Everything that the board gets has to be made available to the public at the same time the board gets it.
That is correct. And this just says no later than 5 o'clock, 4 days prior. It should say 3 days prior.
Should just say no later than 72 hours.
That's fine. You can say
Remove the
72
5 o'clock,
hours.
remove
Yeah,
the-
you
the
can do
full
that.
thing,
Yeah.
Because the 5 o'clock is, if you put
It's not.
3 days prior, 5 o'clock, and we have a meeting that
It
starts
could
at
be.
4 for some reason. now
It
we're
might be
on
late too.
violation.
Yep, that's correct too.
So
Yeah.
Let's do that. Let's, no later than 72 hours prior.
To the meeting.
Just put, that's what the law says.
Yes, that's
Why not
exactly
just
what the
put
law
that,
says.
the
Yeah.
72 hours.
Can I ask what 1211.8.3 is? Clarification.
Well, that is so I have been to meetings where a board member will come and they have something they want to distribute to the board. This is just, and it's rare, it doesn't happen very often, but if all of the board members get something, at that same time, members of the public need to have access to that same document. So the reason for this is, board, if you have something you want to distribute, make sure the fire chief has it so we can have copies available to the public.
7 days prior to the.
That's a long time. I would agree with you. That's,
Where is that?
8.3.
I
you
would
could
just,
take it out. I mean,
I
you
would
could take it out.
strike it totally. Quite
And the thing
frankly,
is nobody knows what's on the agenda at that point in time.
That is
That
correct
was
too.
my- Because the agenda is not
Not
even
out.
going to the board. So
Yeah.
how can you
So
have
it's
some
7 days prior.
information, items on the agenda when the agenda
Yeah,
hasn't been
yeah.
approved?
I
You
would
said
take
that
it out
makes
and
0 sense.
I would just add emphasis where, let's see, a written material given to a majority of the board normally must be made available to the general public. You probably need to say at the same time.
Where, well,
That's
That's 11:9.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's 9.
And that would be similar to a board, whether it's a board member or somebody else
Right.
providing the
yeah, to
documentation.
me, we should just strike 1211.8.3.
I agree. You don't need it. You
Yep.
don't need it.
There's no way to actually make that happen
I-
right now, so,
Yeah, not unless there's, you know,
right?
you know.
1211.5.1, do we need to include something for emergency meetings as well?
you could. The law is gonna tell you what you have to do in emergency meetings. So just because it doesn't say anything in the policy, I mean, you could say, what we could do is 0.5.1 say special meetings and emergency meetings and just say the agenda for special meeting or emergency meeting shall be in compliance with the law. Special meetings 24 hours, emergency meeting is at least 1 hour.
And you know what, on the board packets, on 8.1, we probably should put 4 regular meetings. Because you're not gonna go in an
That's
emergency meeting, you're not gonna distribute something 3 days. in
Or
advance.
special meeting for that matter, yeah.
So,
Sorry,
sorry,
what I just said, is that what you're asking? Okay, on 8.1, board packets for regular meetings.
Okay,
Shall be available.
got it. Okay. And then you got the change to the special. I got that one, special emergency meetings, and we'll change that language to say, they'll comply to the law.
So you have to bring this to the next meeting.
Yeah.
to approve.
With the.
You all change more than the government code number. Okay,
Do you, can we add for 2/3 affirmative vote for amendment to your policies?
you're going back to.
I'm sorry, I'm back at 1201. I'm assuming that's what you've always done. Is that the will of the board to keep it at 2/3?
Where do you see?
Well, it says it's 12, but it's 12:01.
Oh, you're back on
Which
12:1, that's
Oh,
right.
it's contradictory to what the law would require, right?
What's that now?
So
It's, go ahead.
point 1201.4, the very end of it says, and shall require a 2/3 affirmative vote of the board of directors in attendance at the meeting. You wouldn't have to have a 2/3 vote, and 2/3 vote of in attendance at the meeting might not even mean that's a quorum able to take action. So I think you should, I mean, you could even just take out before the and, because a majority vote is sufficient to modify your policies. So it could just read, adoption of a new policy or amendment of an existing policy shall be accomplished at a regular meeting of the board of directors, period. The other question is, do you want this to only be able to happen at a regular meeting? The law also doesn't require that, because there may be a
I
need
would
for
say
special
no,
meeting.
because if that policy wasn't in effect, we could enact these policies now that we're approving.
Yes, that's correct.
So adoption of new policy or amendment of an existing policy shall be at a regular meeting of the board of directors.
Well, I think will just be, shall be accomplished at a meeting of the board of directors, which would mean it could happen at a special or regular.
That portion, we should approve that today. To make the other approvals.
That's right.
So you have to wait to, they're gonna have to come back.
We can't
Two
approve the
meetings.
approval?
Change that now.
And I think what you're noticing has to, I mean, Lexipol, just like there are for a lot of other public agencies, there's companies that mass produce policies, and they aren't always a one size fits all for everyone. Like they just
And,
aren't.
yeah, and I'm not sure they're located in California, I don't know.
I don't think they are.
No, they're not,
Yeah.
but they have California specialists that
Yeah,
every month I get like 7 policies that have changed. You know, or there's a new law, or you need to amend this to that because of.
We're almost done with.
We're almost, after, I think, well, after this board meeting, we have done the bulk majority. We're going to archive the old policies and we will now be completely on Lexipol. And it's only been 7 years.
I always
Only.
thought that this was gonna go on forever.
Well, it will, because you just made more policies that we'll have to do, but we're now off of everything that was in the old policy manual is now into Lexipol, and so we can move forward.
We're getting to the point where it's making changes as needed.
Yeah, or like, coming at this board meeting, I think there's something, the county's now providing leave at home Narcan, so that'll be a new policy that will come through as to how we handle that, but
Leave that.
yeah.
How about the new policy?
I don't wanna ruin the surprise, but
How about the new policy 76.01 or something like that? Or I'm being sarcastic.
all right. Any other questions on policies, agenda or, adoption
12:1 and
policy?
12:1. We dispense with those.
Now we're moving on to 1207, committee formation, creation, development, establishment, education, all of those important things that come with these committees.
I need one.
Do we need any more? Everybody have a copy of 1207?
Oh, I do have one.
Responses?
I have two.
Yeah, I got plenty up here. It's all the way there. There you go. All right. So at the request of the members that attended the last workshop, and I think over some discussions we've had over the last month or so, the committees thing has come up regularly, and it was a request to have some clarification and discussion again on who these are, how they work, what's the difference between a standing committee that we have in policy versus an ad hoc versus a purpose versus whatever. I will let you all drive this discussion.
Well, so I would like to first here, or revisit the differences between ad hoc and standing and but more importantly, the requirements around them in terms of Brown Act in particular.
Okay. Well, the distinction between, why there's an important distinction between ad hoc and a standing committee is ad hoc committees don't fall under the Brown Act for doing an agenda and posting, whereas your standing committees do. So, how do we distinguish between an ad hoc versus a standing? So a standing committee would be one that gets appointed and just perpetually meets, let's just say monthly, or it has a continued jurisdiction or assignment to oversee your finance, like a finance committee of sorts, and you're coming back and bringing recommendations back to the board, but it's an ongoing obligation. It's consistent versus an ad hoc committee. Let's just say, fast forward the clock a number of years and you're out recruiting for a fire chief and you have an ad hoc committee to review applications. That's an ad hoc. It's going to be one time. It's a very specific task. It's not ongoing. There's a distinction between an ad hoc versus a standing committee.
So if you want something in between, what would it be? Standing or an ad hoc?
And in between,
If you want to have regular meetings, but you want to design it so that it does not fall under the Brown Act, what would you have?
there wouldn't really be an in between. So if you have a continual if you have a committee that meets continually and gets appointed by the boards, you have the same participants over and over again, it's a standing committee. Whether we call it ad hoc or standing, if somebody were to challenge it, they would, ultimately the court would say, this is a standing committee. Standing committees have to be agendized versus an ad hoc. So I know this has specifically come up on the personnel committee side of the house, right? And driving the personnel committee. And is that when they're sitting in on negotiations, is that a standing committee that requires an agenda? The way this policy is written right now, the answer is yes, because it is listed as a standing committee. And it also says shall be concerned with labor negotiations and contract development. I mean, that absolutely would make it a standing committee requiring Brown Act agenda and all of the other requirements that come along with it. So if that's not our intent, which based upon conversation that we had at the last workshop, we would, if we're going to keep the personnel committee, we want to change whatever that role or responsibility of the personnel committee is and take negotiations out of it.
And negotiations would be policies or?
Negotiations would not be a standing committee. Negotiations could be a team appointed by the board, but it's going to be for it. We could consider it a negotiating team, or you could say it's an ad hoc committee, and that committee is the negotiation team to carry out negotiations, and it's just going to be for that specific contract negotiation period, right? Negotiations shouldn't always just be ongoing. Once you've reached your TA and you have an agreement, then you stay in place. The committee would disband, you wouldn't be acting anymore, and then the next round of negotiations, you would have a new, we call it an ad hoc committee, a new ad hoc committee. But it could also be that you appoint a negotiating team And then they're designated in your closed session item. When you have the representatives that you're talking to, you would put those committee members there because the board's giving those committee, that, I don't want to use committee, the negotiating team, the direction of what to do at the table.
So maybe the best way is to just give you what we're trying to do and you tell us what it should be called and how it should be administered.
Okay.
So we have an LMI meeting, which is a labor management meeting for non-contractual items, such as who does what and if somebody has labor has an issue with policy and they'd like us to look into it and make recommendations and then come to some sort of a consensus. Either we're going to keep it the way it is or we're going to change it. That's what the LMI meeting is about. And we've been trying to meet every month or so on that, where we just get together and we talk about things that aren't part of the labor contract. So what would we have to put in place to make that legal?
So I have a question for clarification. I think it was at our January meeting. We did committee assignments and we made an assignment to the personnel committee. Is the personnel committee something different than the LMI, or do we just informally call LMI the
LMI.
I said it wrong twice. LMI. Is that really the same
So the
thing?
personnel committee was meeting along with the fire chief and members of 522. A lot of what we were doing in the beginning was going through policies of meet and confer, which kind of fall under the negotiation side of the house, right? So we were going through and gathering information from their side, making recommendations to the fire chief, trying to explain why to labor why things were the way they were, and then they would go through the meet and confer process. Then it came back to the board, and the board would review it, and, approve or deny those. They've had a lot of morale issues, and we've all seen how those come to the board in board meetings where it's a very generalized discussion when it comes to the board in an open board meeting. So we then moved into assisting in LMI, the labor management. I don't even know what the I stands for. Initiative. We called it LMT, labor management team. To see if we could help the chief and the membership come to some sort of an understanding or a mutually beneficial means to an ends on the morale issues. That's where and it happened to be the individuals that were in the personnel committee. Thank you. Yeah. Ended up helping with that. The way I see the LMI side of the house is that is a discussion that happens between labor and management. I think the board members can have a positive portion of that, but it's not our meeting to run. I think it should become more of a the chief wants us in as LMI. We can come in, we can give him recommendations after the fact, not actually as a participant in the room necessarily, but there is a huge benefit to getting all that information firsthand. And I can tell you, having been on that, and some of that stuff was originally being discussed in the personnel committee, it's an eye opener. It's because you get the story from the administration, you get the story from the membership, and being able to sit down and just listen and read the room and get a better understanding. It helped us to be able to give better information to the fire chief on, hey, this is some things we think, may help you and assist you. It also gave us the ability to see what was going on both sides without getting, because my belief is this, and I think it's a pretty popular belief, is you get two stories and it's usually somewhere in between is where everything lies, and trying to figure that out without watching the interaction and those things was extremely difficult. This board has more contact and is more involved than any board in the history of this district has ever been. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's just something that we need to work on how to, one, control it, because I think there are some of these things that definitely should not be in a committee where they're in a Brown Act situation, because like we've seen, nobody wants to air their dirty laundry as you're going into an open board meeting. How do we make that happen? And I think that's kind of where Gary is like, how do we continue down this path? Because I think we are making progress. I know we're definitely making
more
progress.
as facilitators.
Yeah,
And
we're almost facilitating and mediating on some of these morale issues.
So I'm still not clear whether we have a fourth committee that's operating here. Or whether LMI.
you're asking if.
Is the personnel committee, and that it's really a larger committee than just.
I would say that currently it is the personnel committee, and they're operating in a different facet, right? In one area, we're in meet and confer, which is negotiations, and in the other area, we are in a mediation advisory role to the fire chief.
And
Yeah, see, our function is obviously, and you don't need to be told, but to look at the overall situation between labor and management and do what's best for the people that voted us into office, for the community. And if that has to do with, taking and making recommendations on a middle road instead of one way or the other, that is extremely important to have that in place for a oiled organization. And we want to be able to continue to do that.
so if there's an issue between labor and management. And you decide, okay, the chief needs to do something different. You as a board, if the chief reports to you and you tell the board you need to do something different. If labor needs to do something different. I'm trying to figure out, I don't see a nexus there for you to be able to tell labor, no, you're wrong. You can't do that. You don't have the authority to do that as a board.
No, we have recommendations that we can make.
And one of the things I've wondered is to what extent policy is occurring there without the entire board being privy to it.
You're talking about in the meet and confer process, or?
No, I'm talking about in this LMI.
LMI is not dictating policy. LMI is currently working to try and figure out a way to get management and labor and management, because it flows both ways, to work together.
I, as a board member,
trying to help solve some of those issues.
have,
I think of it more as almost as a mediation, but I also think that in those meetings, the level of involvement in the actual room should probably come down quite a bit, if not become extinct and be a observing and advisory to the fire chief.
I guess I've been on board since December, and because of the nature of the committee, I don't think it's appropriate for me to go ask a committee member or the chief what's happening in those meetings. But yet we haven't had a report back to the board on what's happening. I've heard little bits and pieces, and it's really difficult for me.
Because I don't get the same optic you do, and I don't get a report back either.
Well, I think we should report back.
Yeah, we have reported back. Majority of the stuff that came out of the.
I'm hearing other things.
Reporting back out of the personnel committee, majority of the stuff has been reporting back. We conferred over X policies, and that's when they come to the board for review and approval. That's the majority of the stuff that's come out of there. We've also been involved with the side letter for grievances, the side letter that have been working on for the PERS contracts.
The paramedic program.
And what we're trying to do is reduce having the union rep come in here every month and stand up and say, morale's terrible, it really sucks, it's awful, and shaking their heads and then not giving anything substantive. We're asking them through with the chief present, okay, morale's bad. What about morale? What is bad about morale? What is your perception? What is management's perception? And then try to come together with a recommendation for both sides. Not telling them you're going to do this or this isn't right. Chief is the one that's going to write the ultimate response on whether or not they're going to accept what labor wants or deny it. But having the mediation there as board members is extremely important right now. Trust me, it is. And I don't know how we can share that with the board without having some sort of a violation. But
Well,
we do need to
you
report
could
to the
start-
board.
Agendizing your meetings, and then I can come watch.
What's your feeling on how that process has progressed over the last couple of years and also all over the last few months, because we've changed some of the last few months. Yeah.
Well,
Completely honest. Don't worry about hurting anybody's feelings. Please.
well, I think is those people that have got to sit in that room, and that's, I think everybody in there except maybe Janine.
Yep.
I think it paints us a better picture and you get a better understanding, but to Janine's point, if you're not in the room, you don't understand the optics. And so I think it's creates some difficulty for the board as a whole to get an understanding of what's going on. Fairness, right? Because you're in there, you're deeply involved in Gary and Pete right now at this point in time. And so you're seeing a layer that nobody else has access to. And so as stuff gets reported out from labor or from the committee, you're just scratching the surface and not. To Janine's point, I think it maybe does a little bit of a disservice to what's going on, educating the board on what's going on with it. I think over the last 6-8 months, it's improved dramatically in terms of part of one meeting. But it's a process that we're getting to that I'm hoping improves morale and outcomes in the district. I'll just leave it at that for now.
So my question, Janine, would be, would you rather have some of our board members in those meetings helping to assist and facilitate getting us through this morale issue and coming back to the board with problem solved? Because that's kind of what we're doing right now, right? And some of those things are not necessarily at this point in time being reported back to the board, but hopefully you'll see them in the actions, i.e. the stopping of the morale's in the hole, everybody's going to shit, and this is where we are, to those types of discussions. Stopping.
So as an example, I hear morale. I hear morale. But I have no specifics. I have nothing to address. It's been brought up enough at our board meetings that if a member of the public asks me, what are the morale issues? I can say, I don't know. I have to refer you to somebody else. I don't know as a board member what our organization's morale issues are.
I'd like to comment on that. Having worked on the personnel committee and going through all the negotiations and all the ranges and everything, since I've been off of the personnel committee, I'm really out of touch with what's happening with that. And I wonder to myself, how are things going? I really don't know.
Well, if we didn't have that LMI meeting, we would be in the same boat as you guys. We would be in the dark too. We're trying to bring it into the light and coming back with, okay, this was one of the morale issues, board, that they had. We talked with them and we came to this agreement and we think it's fixed. This is what we did.
So can you give me an example of something that you agreed to?
I don't know if we're allowed to under the current situation.
Well, your meetings. were
Because I don't
suspended.
ask, you have subcommittees that you go to. I don't get any reports on those,
Yeah,
do I?
we had one, I only was in one finance subcommittee and I did report out on it. And then there was the strategic committee and we did report out on that. And there is going to be a
There's an agenda item for
presentation
this
coming up,
meeting.
a full presentation as a board on what items have been completed, what are in progress, and et cetera.
I will tell you that it has been difficult getting things moving. But I think that we're coming up with some things that we can report on. Is that fair to say?
But see, the way it stands right now, your meetings should have been agendized and open to the public. The other thing is that, but at the same time, if that's the case, then you can't report back in closed session to the board on those things, right? Something that was supposed to, unless there was an issue that was specific.
I think here, I think what we're running into, so your LMI, you hear them called JLM, joint labor meetings, you'll hear, there's a lot of different little acronyms that might be used. Usually the board does not have a presence in those meetings. It is uncommon for the board to have a presence because it is for labor and management to talk and try to come to an agreement, which would be the distinction then, one of your standing committees. And that's why it talks about assigning what the specific tasks are, because a committee is usually assigned, let's just say finance, right? You, the finance committee, are tasked with sitting down and learning and knowing the budget, and then you come and bring a recommendation back to the board for the board to take action. I think what I'm hearing is coming out of the personnel committee, there isn't any recommendation coming to the board. It's just happening there in the meeting, which is not ordinarily how a committee would operate.
So let me repeat for understanding. So both standing and ad hoc committees are supposed to be advisory and not taking actions. It's supposed to be advisory to the board
That
and
is correct.
reporting back.
That is correct. That's the role of that.
It actually says in 5.2, the authority of the standing and ad hoc committee is limited to providing recommendations to the board.
So I think we've got a merger of a lot of different tasks and roles, I think getting lumped into the committee category, I think is what's happened.
I know one of the frustrations is when, we get together and we accomplish some stuff, and then we have the board meeting and labor says, there was nothing accomplished in our last meeting. When us as the members who were, helping between the chief and the labor, and I felt there was a lot accomplished. The other two did too, and then they come back and say, nothing was accomplished.
So let me ask
So
this.
you three are on the committee?
Well, Pete took my
That's
place.
what I thought. Pete was okay.
Let me ask this question. Where does the idea that what's happening in that is confidential and you can't talk about it? Is that a ground rule that was set by the group that's sitting down to talk and mediate, or where are we getting the thought that we can't share?
I'd love to share if we weren't given the impression that it was a violation of the Brown Act. That's why we only have three.
The violation of the Brown Act is having the meeting and not agendizing the meeting.
Yeah.
That is a Brown Act violation right now.
In LMI meetings, I would be happy if everybody on the board was invited to
Well,
come.
and you can't do that because unless, I mean,
Then
so
that's a
here's,
board meeting.
then that's
You
a
just
board
turn it into
meeting.
a
But that's my
Everybody's-
point. It's not that we're trying to keep some,
Well,
there's,
I think
You're-
the
you're-
question I
you're-
had is, why do we think we can't talk about it? Is it
What's
because,
happening in the.
exactly, is it because the union has the expectation that it's staying there? And if that's the case, then they shouldn't be standing up
No.
and saying we made no
They
progress.
not have the expectation that it's staying.
Okay,
What we do have is we have issues that, of conflict, and we're basically working through conflict resolution. And those are items that we don't necessarily want in the public.
okay, are they directly related to labor negotiations? If that's the case, then you could be talking about that in closed session under negotiations.
no,
Why not?
because we're not talking about anything contractual or
What
financial.
isn't the intent behind that to help the relationship and better negotiations? I mean, I'm trying to get an understanding of, right, what's trying to get accomplished in those sessions, because if the board wants to know, and I think it's helpful for everyone to know,
So
there needs,
I'll give you a
mechanism.
hypothetical. So we get something from labor. They don't like something or a way that something's being done in the district on the administrative side. And they're asking us for change that because it's causing strife amongst their members. And so we discussed those types of things. What can be done? Why is this causing this big headache? Why are you telling us that people are going to leave the organization because of X, Y, Z? And those are kind of the things that we're trying to work through. We literally just got a list finally of some items that we can look at with the fire chief to go, is there anything in here that's actual? The previous list that we got, we worked through, I'd say probably about 90% of them, chief, were either one-time things that have gone and they're no longer lasting, or they were things that we ended up going through and developing policy. One of the policies is the wellness fitness policy and getting the red cards. So it assisted us in, okay, they had this problem. They brought it. Chief developed policy. We brought that policy through and we talked about it, and then it was enacted into policy. So that's no longer an issue.
Mhm.
But it's trying to find out these little nuances that are causing them all these issues. And some of them are very small and some of them are very large and some of them are blown out of proportion and some of them aren't. And figuring out a way, okay, so how do we deal with these issues? And trying to assist him with that process.
Okay.
You know, do you do it? Do you go this way? This is where I've seen it go before. This is something that we've done at other organizations. And that's one of the other things that we have in there is I came from a different organization. Pete came from a different organization, both at different ranks.
Yep.
So we have a little bit of insight into other ways. Chief has insight into how they did things in Stockton because that's where he originally came from. So it's getting those ideas, almost like brainstorming and going, like I just talked to Chief Dewar the other day and told him, hey, you know what? 3 of us have talked. We've got some ideas on things that we think might help. We'd like to sit down and meet with you with some suggestions before we go back into our next meeting. And then right after that, they gave us their list of
Is
these
it
are the things that we feel are causing issues with.
Is the feedback coming out of that more of helping performance wise with the chief to give him, like, evaluate how things are going to give further direction? Again, that would be another means by which evaluation of the chief is a closed session item, to the extent that the board is wanting to be aware of the directions that maybe are going to the chief to say, change this or change that. And not necessarily policy driven, right? But more of how you approach a conversation with somebody or something to that extent.
That could very well be part of what this is occurring.
Because I think what I'm hearing is part of the concern is we don't know what the board as a whole doesn't know what is happening. We need to fix the Brown Act and whether it's a standing versus ad hoc, because that is
I
separate
would love
apart.
nothing more than to be able to just
When, I guess,
dump back to the board and get, but that was the other side of it is how do we, without, and I agree, it should not be a standing committee. How do we keep some of this momentum? And if the momentum dies off, the chief and I sit down and we're like, yeah, this is working, we're gonna figure something else out, I'm fine with that too. But how do we, I think we are in a movement towards a better place than we were when we kind of started doing this a little over 2 years ago. How do we continue that and get the information to the board without making it a standing committee and without opening it to the public? Because there's things in there that if you opened it to the public.
no, nobody does. I mean, I get the reason for, reason to say we don't want to agendize it. I think it defeats the purpose. Because then you don't.
You can figure out a way for us to be able to bring
anything
that into closed session and discuss it in closed session after the fact. I think that would be fantastic.
My other question is, I mean, to the extent that, other folks aren't on the committee, right, and don't know, haven't seen, haven't heard any of it, how disruptive to the process if it shifted the board members that were in there? Does that totally defeat the progress? Because that's another way, right? That gives every board member the opportunity to sit in at different meetings.
At this
Hear what's
point, I
happening
think
and
it,
participate.
at this point, I think it would curtail,
Okay.
progress.
If you'd be like Pete is in the last two, I come now, I gotta get caught up and there's.
No, and that's why I asked the question, right? I mean, and if, Chrissy, as you said, right, your hope would be that you become you're not leading the meeting, you're sitting back and listening. And maybe if you get to that place, then you can rotate
And I
the board
think we are
members
at
in.
that place.
Because then it gives others the opportunity. I'll tell you, and I'm not suggesting that this happens, but the more the union has connection to particular board members, the more they will go to just those members with their concerns and or feel like they can start to negotiate away from the table, which can be difficult, right? Because they start to build that connection and feel like if we already started the conversation, let's just continue it. And then I don't think it's happening probably in the right environment, because negotiation should come direction from the board to say, here's what we want to have happen.
And then what happens? The board fractures.
Yes, that is absolutely correct.
And I think we are getting close to that if we're not already there, is being able to basically sit in the room, listen, and unless the chief wants to call on us during that time, but to come back and meet with him afterwards and go,
So here's
what about this?
I have a question. How long has this committee been in existence? I'm not just with you. What?
Personnel committee?
Yeah, and I'm not talking about just with you, but
This has been here the longest. How long's the personnel committee been?
Well, what we've been doing with the union, it's only 2 years.
Yeah, so the additional involvement has been the last couple of years. The
Yeah.
Personnel committee itself, the
It's
standing
been
committee for
forever.
negotiations has been for.
okay, so that's been a negotiating committee up
Yes.
until 2 years ago.
Yes.
So is there like, in the context of an ad hoc committee, do you see an end in sight? Or,
I think
I mean,
there
is there
always
a
needs,
point where there's a resolution?
I think there always needs to be, because something is always going to come up, no matter how many times you fix something. There's always going to be something new that is going to make somebody unhappy. And by the same token, to address what you said and what your fear is, I'm probably more involved in going to labor and talking to them at the fire stations than anybody else on the board. And I did that because I wanted to have a well-rounded idea, not only what I'm getting from management and the community, but with labor. And you have to be very careful and guard against having conversations with anybody that gives you an opinion, because I am not a board by myself. I can't do anything by myself other than to ask and listen what's going on. So if you address it from that standpoint, you bring a plethora of information back to the board and back to the chief on maybe things that they didn't quite get from them because maybe they didn't feel comfortable doing it or whatever. But I think it's extremely important to always have communications with labor. We've got a morale problem right now. We want to get more money. We need to have labor support in going out and pushing and talking to the community as far as being able to get a measure passed for more money. We need to have them understand that what they want and what they think, even though they may not know completely what they want or how to put it across, that they're important. They're the backbone of this fire department. And to make decisions just based on what management wants is not serving the community that voted for me. And it's got to go on continuously. Things are always going to come up. And hoping to stay balanced in what we say and do is extremely important. And without being able to have something like this, you just need to tell us how to make it work and how to make the rest of the board comfortable.
Agendize it, make a standing committee and
I
agendize
mean,
it.
with action of the board choosing who the individuals are and with continued meetings, right, and jurisdiction, it really does fall under a standing committee, which then requires it to be agendized, which defeats the entire purpose of what you are all trying to do.
So can we do a 6-month ad hoc at the end solves and
So-
it needs to start up?
There's a couple of different ways, and I don't know, it may take some time to get to where where everyone feels like we need to be, but what I'm hearing, and that's true, labor, I mean, things happen, people get unhappy, right? I would imagine as a board, your hope would be that management could have those meetings, right? And resolve those issues and come back and report to you through closed session, through negotiations, or however it might be, so that everything's good, we've got it addressed. And if it can't, then have the chief say, I think it's time to have a couple of members come and let's sit in and hold a meeting. That's more ad hoc in nature, right? It's on an as needed basis. And it doesn't take the formal action of the board. But if we're saying we have a personnel committee or we have our LMI committee and they're meeting from here on out, that's something different. How did you pick who is sitting on the LMI? Is it formal board action on who was appointed to sit on the committee, I'm assuming?
Yes, the committee itself, yes.
Okay. Okay.
That was our January meeting.
January.
I have a number of concerns about that committee and the appearance of the committee. It does create a relationship with certain board members and labor. It also looks like the organization has to have the board looking over the chief's shoulder. I think it also may to some degree inhibit the chief to be able to do his job. I mean, I'm not sure how many organizations you sit with. But I don't, the board having direct ongoing communications with labor, I don't think is typical.
It's not.
And I think it sets up some potentially organizationally dysfunctional channels. If there's a problem with the chief, then let's hear what those problems are and let's have a closed session on it. But to create a forum for labor to have ongoing access to the board, to me, is labor saying we're the tail wagging the dog. And, we hire a chief that's supposed to have expertise to run an organization. And if we don't, we need to address that. And quite honestly, the history with this organization, labor has had a problem with Corrado, Betancourt, Walder. This goes back 30 years with labor. And I think the more you create a forum for them, I think there's appropriate organizational channels that exist in most organizations and that we should be patterning ourselves in that manner. I also think that at some point it could compromise the board members on LMI with the rest of the board. You promised what, you did what, you condoned what, I'm not gonna say I have a problem because I don't even know really what's going on. I hear bits and pieces and I'm very uncomfortable hearing bits and pieces of
I can
things.
tell you, there's
From
been no
different people.
promises that have come out of the personnel committee that have not been to the board first. And all those were done prior to you.
Yeah, all I'm saying is
coming
I
in.
don't know, because I just don't know what's going on. And I hear things that sound, operational in nature and
Well, the chief's there for everything, and any recommendations that are made by our group are made directly to the chief. I don't know if there would be a violation for you to go to the chief and you can ask him what's going on and he will give you a report.
if you guys keep doing this, then you have to start agendizing it. That's all there is to it, and publicizing it. So I don't understand the context of what you're saying of me going to the chief.
But since we started doing this, I think Chief's been able to make more headwind of doing things, because it's like every single time, and it's like, he's not been able to get anything done.
What would you like to see? Would you like to see no more involvement from the board in labor management and that type of stuff? Less involvement, continue the same involvement? What are your desires?
I want to interrupt. I think the chief should be able to come to the board and ask for support when he needs it. I think that's really putting him on the spot.
Okay.
Sorry,
Well,
I'm sorry. I just, to me, if you want to have that private conversation with him, I just hate to put him on the spot like that.
I think by him approving and authorizing the LMI, because he was the one that has been in favor of it, I believe, that he did come to us. And he wants to make his relationship with labor better. And
Oh, I don't disagree with that. I think he does. And I think that he would really like the support of the board to do that.
I mean, let's do it. I mean, if it's going to be that difficult, let's do a closed session as far as chief's performance. You made that comment as far as that would be a way to get in, and then we can lay everything out on the table and we can talk about how this side and that side haven't been able to come together on some things.
That certainly brings the board in the loop. It doesn't address the standing committee issue with the public nature of those meetings,
Yeah,
which
that's what I'm getting at.
there's two different issues that I think that exist.
And that's-
Yeah, and number three, it was what you just said, is bringing the board up to date. The board can't be brought up to date in open session to say, we've come to an agreement on X, Y, and Z.
You have to give us a little more time to do that. We're getting there. And we just came up with, this is the first time as of 2 days ago, we got a list since I've been on the board, or since a subcommittee, and I've been on the board, where they came to us with a non-monetary list of things that they'd like to see changed. And, you know, given the opportunity to pursue that with the chief, we're gonna have a meeting set up with him, go over those things. At that point, we have something a little more substantiative to share with the board.
Question for you. So if you have predetermined committee members and they are available for an issue that when it comes up, so that it is not a planned meeting,
Correct. Yeah.
are you okay?
So that becomes more of like an ad hoc
Yeah,
committee, which would not be governed by the Brown Act. That is more of a on an as need basis. Again, like I said, you're recruiting for a particular position, you get a group of board members that want to review the applications and do the initial review. That is ad hoc. That's not governed by the Brown Act because of that. So if it is more of a as needed, I don't think that's how it's operated to date. And I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong. Also, if the board's action to appoint it was as the personnel committee, then that still, no matter what, however we say it's needed, needs to be fixed because it was created as a standing committee.
No, I understand it.
Well, we can act, and when we ask you to set up something so we can continue to try to do things. And if we want to do that as an ad hoc, and meet as needed, I'm more than comfortable with that, but it's still not addressing, including the rest of the board in on what's going on. And I agree with you. If I was sitting in your seat, I would not be comfortable because I would not know everything that's transpiring. So I don't know how we resolve that.
Well, that could be, I mean, again, that's where it's hard to know, right? When you say a list of things we want, is that a change in the contract? Because then that could be negotiations, right? That if you're meeting and working and reworking the language in the contract, that's negotiations. If it's more of I want to have pre-scheduled meetings with the chief, or when we sit down, I want to make sure I have somebody else with me, that's not negotiation, right? I think the question would be, is it negotiation related and or is it viewed as looking at the performance of the chief, which could get you into closed session in both of those times. But I don't know all of what's happening to be able to tell you that it would all squarely fit into one of those. I think it probably could, but without knowing all of it, I can't affirmatively say, yes, it would, not knowing what the issues are. Because it could also be personnel, right? If there's an issue with an employee, there's a closed session personnel item too. But then we're getting we need to be pretty specific when we agendize from time to time.
So to me, okay,
you know
what I'm hearing is that we definitely have a Brown Act issue. And so I'm gonna go back, and I understand what you said, but I'm still gonna go back to the chief. I support you 100%, chief. Do you see a benefit to having people in there? Would you like to be able to? I think we need to get rid of the personnel committee. Be able to call on certain board members to come in at different times when you think they may be valuable to what you're doing, or what would you like? What do you think would help you accomplish the goals that we've been trying to?
I'm going to say as the personnel committee sits today, we're obviously violating. And so that issue needs to be addressed.
Yes.
Here today.
I didn't hear what you said, Chief.
I said the way we're doing it today is a violation of the Brown Act, right? We need to, if this personnel committee continues to exist in this fashion, we continue to have these meetings, they need to be agendized and open to the public. That's a fact, right? Now, I think there's some value, and I think we've made progress to have individuals in the room, but I think that should happen on an as needed basis, which creates the nexus of an ad hoc type scenario where, hey, we're going to have a bunch of meetings and things will stack up, and then, hey, maybe the board comes in and on a quarterly basis to sit down and evaluate as we report through some things. I think that's probably as we're gaining progress or crossing over the top of the hill. I think to your point earlier, some of that involvement can pull back and allow really the job you've been trusting me with and pay me a lot of money to do is to manage and deal with these relationships, and you've provided a great basis of information and training in that aspect. But at some point, I would be remiss if I said, sometimes I feel like in that room, my ability to do my job is being undermined because there's direct access to you all. Or there's indirect access that comes around me when I say, hey, no, I'm absolutely not going to do X. And then they can come to you around in a direct relationship and say, well, we don't like that idea. We need you to put pressure. And we get to the point of the tilling, you know.
What I didn't want to do was take away that tool from your toolbox of being
No.
able to, hey, you're talking about something that may deal with strategic plan, and you're like, you know what? I'm going to bring in a couple of people from, that have been involved or I'm dealing something that deals with union business. So I have people that have history in that. So I want to bring them in. Even not even in the room, but being able to sit down with and just go, this is what they've brought me, which is basically what we kind of did a little bit of the other day. This is what they've brought me. What do you think of this?
Or I'll go to the,
Give me some advice. What do you think we can do with this? It's his decision, but being able to solicit that advice or being able to bring people into here, I think is valuable. And that's why I'm trying to get around, because I agree. And I think about a year ago, we tried to get around the Brown Act thing. And we went, okay, well, it's going to be a negotiating team. Because at that time, we were dealing more with
everything was negotiated.
yeah, it was a lot of
It was
meet, it was a
ongoing,
lot of meet
yeah.
and confer. It was a lot of meet and confer over the grievance policy, over the PERS stuff, and some other things that we had brought to the board before that we were trying to get through. So it was truly a negotiations rather than
Then
but that has since gone away, but is coming back
it will come back.
because we're getting ready to start
See
back
if
into
we get done,
negotiations.
right, yeah.
It's another thing we need to talk about. But I didn't want to go, yes, Brown Act issue and just cut it out. If there's a way that we could still keep a portion of those tools in this toolbox to be able to use.
I'll go to the meeting we had, the ad hoc meeting we had with labor leadership the other day to talk about the future of the district and funding opportunities. Like, that's a perfect example of bringing in a few of you as, the experts of the board to get up to speed and talking about, hey, where are we going? What are we doing? And then the expectation is you all will report out at a board meeting to talk about, hey, we met with them. This is kind of some of the gist of what was discussed so that everybody gets on the same page.
Yeah.
Those are that's the very nature of the ad hoc and what I think more of. But again, the personnel committee as it exists and how we've been existing is obviously needs work. Yes.
So, first of all, I want to acknowledge the work of the committee because everything I'm hearing is that it's provided some positive and productive results. So, so I don't want to take away from that at all. But given the circumstances and also in credit to the committee, and I'm getting this from what you just said, maybe there's a way to start to kind of pare back, and all the issues don't need to come before the committee, that it will be labor management, it will be chief and whoever he thinks on his management team is appropriate for the topic. And then from time to time, if there's a topic, where he feels one or more board members might be helpful, then can call on that. And if necessary, if there's something that's maybe a bigger issue that requires some study and evaluation. And again, the committee is supposed to be advisory to the board, that then an ad hoc committee is formed for that specific item. And then I'm going to take it one step further, and that is to suggest that a negotiating team be separate and that a negotiating team be management that is reporting back to the entire board in closed session, that is provided direction from the entire board in closed session and given direction in closed session. Because I really think for a board member to be on the negotiating team, it kind of compromises that board member, because, you know, there's might be things that you think, yeah, this sounds really good, and you know, you're kind of semi agreeing to it and making an obligation to carry it back to the board. It's better to have, not have a board member in that position.
Both Ken and Chris were on the last negotiations team. How did you guys feel that that went in that aspect, being a board member? I know for me, having negotiated multiple contracts with the city, it was generally speaking, it was the HR director, the city's negotiator. They would call in individuals. We did have a couple of times where the city manager came in, and we had a couple of times where we were having issues where the mayor came in and sat in on our meetings. But a little different, right? Because he's the chief, the HR director, and
Right.
He wears all the hats.
why do you keep pointing at her?
She didn't say that.
So when we were on the negotiating team, she came up with a plan. This is what I think we should do. Let's see what they have to hear back what they want. We went in there, we had our attorney, we sat there. He handed out some brochure pamphlets. He says, this is what he listened to what they had, and they had nothing to offer. And so this is an idea that we sort of came back with, or we sort of said, how about this? How about this? How about that? And we stepped out, we came back in. They said, okay, we want a little bit of this and that. Then we sort of came up with a plan to, okay, we're going to do this for the next 3 years. Then we came back, and then we asked, do you have anything else? And they're like, not really. They didn't really have a plan. They just want more to listen to us. It was back and forth. We listened to what the chief thought. We thought it was a great idea. Let's pitch it. Am I right, Ken?
Yeah.
And then we came back. We negotiated like 7-8 times. And then when they wanted, like at the final deal, they wanted to change a bunch of different stuff, little stuff that I don't know why they didn't do that in the beginning. And so it wasn't us talking. We were more supporting the chief with the input. We thought it was a great idea. And then he came back talking to the board about it. You got any more to tell?
No, it's good.
So your involvement actually in the room was limited? It was more the chief and legal counsel?
Yeah, I think the chief did most of the talking. I mean, we were there supporting him and having to want to hear what they wanted. And then we came back and talked about, well, they sort of wanted to change the AA versus the BA, as in having, this was like at the end, they wanted to have equal pay, instead of, if you have a BA, you got a percentage more versus they want equal. It's like, well, why would you want to get a BA if your percentage of compensation is the same? So, it's like little stuff like that. We scratch our head and we talk stuff over with the chief. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And legal was.
Would have been
Legal-
Paul from our office, yeah.
Paul
And
was.
I think that the distinction from what should, and I think happen for negotiations, right, is the team should be given the direction from the board as a whole. You meet in closed session, whoever that team is. The board says, here's the authority that you have. The team goes and negotiates and continues to report back to the board. And if there's other things that came up we haven't talked about before, that you make sure that you get the whole board support, because the last thing you want to do is start to have TAs and go back and the board says, that's not what I want, right? And that could certainly compromise certain board members if that happened. But the key would be that you get the direction from the board, report back to the board, and the board gives you the authority to move forward through the process. And I believe that's probably what you did the last go around. I wasn't the one sitting at the table, but I believe that is the difference now with the LMI group, right? Is I don't think there's been the report back to get the direction from the board to further the tasks at the table.
So what is your background in negotiating?
I do frequently sit at the table with management. much like Paul did for you guys, I do. So that is a role that I play oftentimes in my role, and I defer to whoever the lead, the head of the organization is. So here would be Chief Dewar to say, do you want me to take the lead? Do you want to take the lead? How do you want to operate? And a lot of that depends upon whoever's the lead negotiator for the union as well, because I have taken the role with 522 of being the lead negotiator because their attorney from Asagni that happened to be there for that was taking the lead, so I did it. Versus, and that's just a matter of team cohesiveness, right? What works better in those situations. So it can happen any of those ways
I would anticipate that this go around.
with their attorney to come. And that tends to change the dynamics a bit when their attorney starts to get involved. Honestly, sometimes it helps bring things back in a little bit when the union has their attorney as well.
Yeah, their current person from Mustang's office, we've worked with.
John Colburn.
Yeah. I think that might bring the temperature down and allow us to
I think it might.
into something.
Yeah.
Sometimes it does, yeah.
And then also not, not one board member or the chief or somebody gets tagged for, what they said or how they said it or,
And who do you, so you've got yourself, like I said, like when I came from, we're dealing with a city, so there's different other department heads within.
There's a larger group or team, right? Yeah.
How do you usually do that? Is it you and a paralegal? that comes
Usually
in?
it would just be me from my office. Usually it would just be me from my office. I may have people back at the office helping with drafting or something to that effect, but it would usually, unless somebody wanted otherwise, just be me at the table.
And then chief.
And the chief and whoever else from management side that you have on the team, or whoever the board chooses to have on the team. I could say it that way too.
Do you have any other organizations that you worked with that have board members that are sitting on them?
Periodically, I will. I do not right now have an organization that always has a board member on the team. We have in the past, because sometimes the trust, and I'll tell you, usually it happens when the trust is lacking and whoever is getting the direction from the board, they're worried that maybe not the right message is getting shared with the table. But usually if it happens, it's the board will be there for some, but not for all of them. And maybe there's specific topics, just like calling in different members from the management team, right? Let's just say you have a bit deeper pool to pull from, right? If you're talking budget and salary, you might bring the CBO in for that conversation. The CBO may not be a permanent member of the team because they don't have all of the information and background on all topics. But I certainly have sat at the table with board members there.
You see any pluses or minuses to that?
The minus that I have seen tended to be that the union felt, and again, this is just from past experience, the union felt that by getting board members there, they didn't have the confidence in the chief or the leader such that they could go around. And if the chief said no, they knew, well, I have somebody else who sat at the table, maybe I'll go talk to them about it. So what I have seen happen is it does sometimes create the channel to those particular board members for conversation. And it takes that board member to turn back around and say, no, you need to go back to the chief, or you need to go back to so-and-so. So you're not having those conversations. And sometimes that can be hard to do for folks.
But you know that whether there's a ad hoc committee or a standing committee, like that, historically, you're gonna have labor that is going to try to influence outside. At least having this in an authorized environment with the chief present is not allowing it to get out of hand. Okay, but you're always going to have, if you go to different things, you're always going to have somebody, if you're in a position of authority, pulling on your ear, trying to influence you.
Sure.
I had labor call me last week and tell me that, left a message on my phone that they had some questions for me. That's all. I had no idea what they wanted. When I returned a call, they told me that they wanted me to sit down with them and their outside accountant to go over the district's books. I felt that was totally inappropriate
Sure.
in terms of my relationship with my other board members in particular and the chief.
It would have
And
been more appropriate for them to call this district's accountant to sit down and go over the books.
well, it, and I try to say, well, what are your questions? Well, it's just, they have some questions and I can't really articulate them because they're technical, blah, blah, blah. But so a meeting would be best. I said, well, you just send me the questions and I will refer you to the person who can answer them, or if they're just, something I can answer quickly off the top of my head, I'll answer it quickly off the top of my head, and they didn't want to do that. What they wanted me to do was start meeting with them outside of the rest of the board. And I refused to do it. I was polite about it. And I said, I don't know who's going to be negotiating. I don't know, but I'm not going to step on the board members' toes, is what I told them. So I think there's a time and a place for relations between board members and labor. And quite frankly, I think there's a lot more we can do. In the pinning ceremonies, I think it'd be great if there's an opportunity for each board member to say, congratulations, welcome aboard, appreciation events, things like that. I think that there's other venues and other ways, and I think it's important to do that. Don't get me wrong, when it comes to trying to increase funding for the district, it's all about having competitive, fair wages and good sound equipment for them, to operate with.
So as far as negotiation, what I think would work best for us, and this is just my recommendation, would be for council to do negotiations, for the chief to participate in all of the operational portions of the negotiations. Having done this in the past, sometimes it causes strife when you're negotiating for the money side and the chief's involved, because then you get the feeling of the chief is negotiating against us for money.
Yeah.
But I'll refer that to you. And then giving the negotiating team of legal counsel and the chief the ability to, if they do have something that comes up to where they feel that there is a board member that has some sort of expertise that they would like to bring in for a meeting, to be able to come to the board and request that during closed session to be able to do that.
And they both would come into closed session.
Yes.
Yes, but not just
We
one.
want to get
Both
reports on all
come into
TAs.
closed session.
We want to get direction on where we are monetarily as far as that goes, or anything else that we see within the contract. And I would also implore the entire board to get familiar with the unit's contract, so that we do have, if we have things that we would like to suggest or clean up or whatever, we can do that too.
It would be great to have a closed session item. What was mentioned to me in that conversation was that there was going to be a request to kick off negotiations soon.
Well, I had brought that up when we were doing meet and confer, that we needed to start it sometime in May to June to start discussing all non-monetary issues, so that come August, when we actually know how much money we have, we can start negotiating monetary issues
Yeah.
to get the contract done before its deadline.
Yeah, so my point was that, maybe it might be too close to the next meeting, but that we soon have a closed session strategy meeting about here's the parameters, here's the outside guardrails, like,
And
based on the district's finances, based on, whatever.
or articles that any one of the board members knows have been an issue or need revision or something along those lines. And the feedback there before we get started is good to have too.
And we know we have quite a few items.
Yeah.
Under PERS law that need to be.
That needs to be updated too. Yeah. But that would be a great opportunity to bring the board up to speed on, here's some of the things we know we need to do. What are other areas that we might want to address? And then the finances is always the toughest part of the process.
Yeah.
It is. Without about it.
So back to 1207.
Yeah, let's go back.
So I guess the couple of different questions. Do we, if the standing personnel committee is not the LMI group, do you need a standing personnel committee? So then the policy would be updated and you would have strategic planning and budget and finance committees. And those would be your two standing committees.
I would say the strategic planning,
Is that not ongoing?
well, it's a question I
Okay.
have. Strategic planning, so we have adopted a strategic plan and we have a committee that meets with the chief to get updates on progress and provide feedback. So for example, as a result of that, she's going to be coming with a report out to the entire board at the upcoming meeting, right? Is it upcoming meeting?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so at some point, we're going to get to the point on that strategic plan where we have either implemented things or there are things that it says like study feasibility. We're going to say, you know what, this is a no-go. And it'll be, you know, we've checked all the boxes. So the question is, does that, if it's, that's then would be an ad hoc committee if it would just went for this strategic plan? Or does that committee go on for development of the next strategic plan? So I'm asking the board, it kind of depends on what our intention is for the assignment of this committee, what we decide to do.
Just what, and the feedback from the board is, one option would be the board may appoint the following standing committees, and then on an annual basis, you make the determination, is this the year that strategic plan is an issue, or is this a year we need to update it? And then you have the standing committee for that period, you know, at that point. That's an option, but I think your question is a good one to determine what the need is.
Because, you know, I understood it just relative to the existing strategic plan but that was an assumption on my.
Yeah, I think it has a defined timeline, which by its nature would say it's off. You know, we're gonna meet on the front side, knock those things off, and then we're coming to the board every quarter-ish and reporting out to the whole board, so.
Yeah.
That's up to you all.
And it doesn't matter to me whether it's ad hoc or standing, as far as I'm concerned.
That's because I gotta prepare the agenda.
Well, that's true. It is a staff, yeah.
And post it, right? And so that becomes and really the bulk majority of the work will be done at the board meetings to present out and give you the information. And I see it as we met a bunch up front. We'll meet probably a few times in between, but now the bulk majority is gonna be, hey, here's the things we've accomplished. That's.
I mean, the main thing we're doing is giving the chief an opportunity to report progress to us and to give some guidance on expectations around reporting out.
What about the budget and finance committee? What's the frequency and what's that for? Is there one?
Yes.
Usually depends, it maybe it used to be somewhat quarterly,
Okay,
and then it becomes even more frequent when there's a new budget.
Of
being
course.
developed,
yeah.
And the tax estimates come in. We
Yeah.
Usually meet more frequently. Okay. You say maybe twice, 3 times a year?
But it's probably a standing committee because it goes on
Every
and
year,
on.
Yeah. Because you're gonna set your budget on an annual
Yeah, the
basis.
membership could
Yeah.
change, certainly.
Yeah.
but-
So you could have the budget and finance committee shall be a standing committee of the board. The board may choose to establish additional standing committees and not have others specifically identified. And then if you identify a need, something happens or there's changes in the community and you feel the need to have another standing committee, the policy would give you the ability to.
And this doesn't even say anything about ad hoc committees.
Does not.
We probably should say something about the.
It has it in one place. It's up in point one in scope and purpose.
And in 5.2.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So it does have some reference to
Okay.
it. And then that's really truly on an as needed basis.
Yeah.
Right? So if we took out 7.3 just says the Budget and Finance Committee shall be a standing committee of the board. And then the board may establish additional standing committee meetings or standing committees as needed. Yeah, yeah,
Standing
Yeah.
and ad hoc.
additional standing and ad hoc. Yep, committees as needed. We can do that. Which then means we
And
delete
you know what?
7.6 because that's the personnel committee description as well as the standing committee on strategic planning.
All of this says that the chair will, appoint the committee, and it doesn't say, let's see. No. The way we've done it is that the board approves it, but it doesn't even, the way that it's written, it's almost like the chair can establish a committee and not
Yeah.
even tell the board about it.
Which one are you talking about?
And like on
Well,
an
it's in
ad
a
hoc,
couple of different places, probably, yeah.
on an ad hoc committee, it almost could be like a secret committee because he could establish it, and they could do their work and
You could just have 7.2 at the top be the board shall appoint such ad hoc committees as may be deemed necessary or advisable by the board.
I mean, that's usually what boards do. I think.
Yeah,
The
you'll
board-
see, you sometimes will see it, in it, with the board chair having that option too. More often than not, the whole board is the one that takes the
We
action.
should get this, remove in the second sentence there by him or herself and or the board, and just have it read. The board president shall appoint such ad hoc committees as may be determined necessary or advisable by.
By the board. You could certainly do that.
So the chair is going to
Make the
make the
appointment
appointment, but it's as advised
by
by
the
the
board. That's
The
fine.
board says we need it for this, and the chair goes, okay, do I have anybody that's interested? No. Okay, I'm gonna appoint you, Gary, and you.
If you don't have interest. but
Just
it'd be a
something to
board
close the loop, that's all.
Yeah, that's fine. So we'll just remove by himself, herself, and or, and it'll just say as advisable by the board. Okay,
Six.
yeah, 0.7 should come out too, because that's the strategic planning committee.
I think 7.6.
We're gonna continue the strategic planning committee as an ad hoc committee,
Yes, I think that's what I heard.
so then we'll have to bring that out at the board meeting, that it's no longer a standing committee, it's an ad hoc committee with a duration of 6 months.
Or I mean, so what your policy says that the ad hoc is considered dissolved when its final report has been made, is what your policy
So-
says.
Final report on the existing
Yeah.
strategic plan.
I should want it the committee itself to disappear into oblivion,
And not
because that's
have
something I
anybody-
know that the body
Working on
has really latched onto is.
seeing that to the end. You don't want to give the impression that you've stopped.
I'm hoping to report
So-
outs on a regular basis at the board.
Yes.
Will help.
So,
Alleviate that concern.
I think it will too. I think those meetings will become less and less. It'll be more of just report out.
so no personnel committee, but LMI as an ad hoc committee
Yeah. And on an as needed basis.
on an as needed basis.
Correct.
And then, if we want to appoint a negotiating team, do we agendize that for our next?
You could have a closed session discussion about that to talk more about who you want on the team in addition, in addition to Chief Jor. You certainly could do that at your next meeting in closed session. You absolutely could.
In our June meeting,
Has your agenda already been posted?
if it hasn't, it's.
It's
half an
very
hour
close.
today,
Okay.
And I'm not, right, I don't have time to write a memo
Yeah.
and change the agenda.
It only has to be, I don't know, because we still have this policy. not-
Just because you don't have,
Well,
Right.
it's,
Does it need to be in closed session?
We have the new policy, we'd be good to go.
it depends upon, does it have to be? No, the board could choose to have that discussion in open session if you wanted. I think you can get it, you might have.
But
more
it's
candidates.
still an agenda
It
item.
is still an agenda item anyway, we look at it, yeah.
can we do it in June under the negotiations? We'll talk about stuff to fix. What your
Direction is.
direction is, appointment of the team.
Yeah, but if you do it as a closed session item, you don't need a staff report. All you
Oh,
need
that's
is
true.
that one,
Uh,
all you need is the one blurb in the agenda itself.
Let me see if I can get it in there.
Cause then if you
give
can
me
get,
the-
yeah, if you can get in there, then we
We've
can
got-
get it for Megan.
And what we could,
Margaret
to the
stuff.
extent that this is going to be a change in practice, reporting out could be that the board appointed the negotiating team and the following individuals are on the team. If you feel like because there's some change in practice and people might wonder, well, who's gonna do the negotiating? You could do that
At the end of the meeting?
Yeah, after closed session.
after closed session.
No.
Oh.
Closed session at the end of the meeting.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll do our level best to get it in there and get it out. We should
Can
have.
I bring one
I'll let
thing?
Katie say.
Can I bring up one thing about closed session meetings? I know we have to do it when it's best during a meeting. But with the few people from the public that do show up at our meetings, and when I was sitting out there, it was frustrating to come to a meeting at a certain time, then have a closed session and kick everybody out. And then when you open it up, half the people have gone home.
Well, and that,
So either having it before or early or at the end seems to make sense.
I agree.
yeah, that's why when it makes sense, I like to have them at the end. Obviously, the community sometimes doesn't want to hang out to hear the report out, but it gives them the opportunity to go home. Them at the beginning, because we have sometimes time constraints.
If it's a short item and,
Or
that the
or we
beginning
have
is fine.
counsel that doesn't want to wait around for a
What
few
you-
hours.
and it-
I mean, that we don't want to pay them.
I was-
Streamlining our meetings.
So I think in that event that you do a first meeting, just set a time limit that says we will meet for, and then the public knows they don't need to come until
So,
5:30 or
Notice
6.
it that way.
So you don't have to sit.
I like that.
And then if you don't finish, you reconvene after the fact, but at least then the public knows when the board's going to come out.
Yeah, we just don't want to make it more difficult for the few people that show up.
Right.
Yeah,
So what I'm hearing in this one though, is we're gonna make it at the end of the meeting for, next week's meeting. Yeah. Okay. All right,
the closed session agenda language should come under discuss specifically.
thank you. All right.
All right.
I have to go.
I
Okay,
think those were your items. The agenda.
I had one other thing, but if I can throw it out there for future, maybe. And that is, I'm not sure what the chief's contracting authority is, but I would like to give him contracting authority that he can approve contracts under a certain equal to or less than a certain amount. And then,
date minimum for bids.
Well, it depends upon, there's gonna be different minimums, whether it's construction or it's, say, an independent contractor for services, roof repair. There will be there's some limits there, but it is common to have an authority set at $20,000 or $30,000 sometimes, because then it doesn't stymie your ability to get some things done. In those
I think he
instances,
has.
the contract would still come back to the board after the fact, so the board's aware of it.
right,
But it would give you the ability, and you might very well, Lexipol probably has a policy like that.
I think we already have something like that.
You
Can we look at it?
You probably
Because,
do.
that,
you know, if there's an emergency or something and he needs to prepare something right away, it would be good if he had the ability to do that. And then, like you say, he's got to report out at the next board meeting if he executed
To
it
an
on
extent,
the
because
document.
we did this
So much.
roof of Station 19, if I think that.
Exactly.
No,
That's what flagged it for me. Is that,
Oh, the roof?
yeah,
yeah.
Well, we'll figure it out. We'll look at the policy and see what it says.
can't call them.
What happened to Station 16? There's no, front. It's been all torn out.
You mean 18?
Or 18, I mean,
They're redoing the sidewalk and the apron.
Remember, we had the,
That's the city's doing that.
city.
I don't town,
Town, yeah,
township, make it very expensive.
I know. Yeah.
I think that's what.
You don't live in 16.
Way more.
It's
Walking around.
Boundless view?
Town this area, yeah.
All right. I will, research and bring that, probably not to the May meeting, but to you
Yeah.
for sure.
Okay.
Right. And I will work with you to meet, we can do the revisions.
Yeah, I'll
done.
do all the revisions,
Perfect.
send them over for review to make sure everything.
I'm sorry.
Did I hear a motion? Motion to adjourn the meeting?
So,
Second.
3 in 1 second.
And done.